Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to do something a little different. We are looking right past the daily sound bites, the flashy headlines, the political theater, and we're digging straight into the structural realities of U.S.-Iran relations. Because if you really want to understand the massive shifts happening on the global geopolitical chessboard right now, you have to look at the numbers.
Okay, let's start right here with this highly publicized quote that just absolutely dominated the media cycle. President Donald Trump sat down at his golf resort and said, "The Strait of Hormuz will open very soon or Iran will be hit very hard." Literally, every major network picked this up as the headline of the day. And you can see why, right? It's simple, it's a great soundbite, and it generates a ton of clicks. But what is it missing?
Well, it's missing the reality on the ground. On the exact same evening that this quote was dominating the news cycle, Reuters and CNN published a quiet but honestly alarming reality regarding severe U.S. missile depletion. The mainstream media spent, 90% of its time on the political rhetoric, leaving the actual military logistics completely in the dark. So we are going to shine a light on those logistics.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll hit the math of weapon depletion, Iran's maritime trap, the Pentagon's strategy, China's silent move, and finish up with imperial overstretch.
Section 1. The Math of Depletion. Weapon Depletion Metrics.
Look, you don't need a military degree to understand this next part, honestly, just a calculator. Check out the sheer speed of consumption here. The THAAD system, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, is essentially a crown jewel of American missile defense. 5 months ago, the U.S. had roughly 450 of these deployed globally. According to CNN, that stockpile is now nearly 80% depleted. That means the U.S. has burned through about 360 interceptors in just 5 months, and since Raytheon only produces about 80 to 120 of these a year, you're looking at 3 to 4 years of uninterrupted production just to get back to where we started before all this.
And it doesn't stop with that. The Patriot interceptor, which is the absolute workhorse of American missile defense, started with over 2,300 interceptors globally. Today, it sits at approximately 800. That is a 65% depletion. Add to that the ATACMS, the primary long-range precision ground strike missile, which Reuters and CBS sources confirm are virtually all consumed. Tomahawk cruise missiles, roughly half gone. The arsenal is heavily exhausted.
Which brings us to the most brutal math of all, 80 to 1. This isn't just a basic supply chain issue. It is a fundamental cost asymmetry. Iran is forcing the U.S. into an 80 to 1 cost ratio every single day.
Let me break down exactly where that ratio comes from. Iran produces about 500 Shahed drones a day. These cost roughly $50,000 each to manufacture. Cheap, right? But every time the U.S. shoots one down using a THAAD or a Patriot interceptor, it costs $3 to $4 million per shot. Think about that. For every 50 grand Iran spends, the U.S. has to spend up to $4 million. Mathematically, how long can you keep that up? Well, as those depletion numbers just showed us, not indefinitely is already here.
Section 2. Iran's maritime trap. Bypassing conflict.
So Iran is fundamentally changing the geopolitical architecture on the ground, and they are completely bypassing traditional military confrontation. First off, let's look at the supply chain. The U.S. imposed a naval blockade to cut off Iran's military supply lines, right? Standard move. So what did Iran do? They simply found a different road. Since March, Iran has rerouted virtually its entire strategic supply chain. We're talking drone components, missile materials, straight overland through a 900-kilometer border with Pakistan. I mean, no U.S. aircraft carrier or submarine can block a land border. So while the U.S. patrols the waters, 500 drones a day are still being built with components brought in overland.
And in the waters of the Strait of Hormuz itself, Iran has devised this brilliant administrative trap through bilateral talks with Oman, completely cutting the United States out of the loop. It basically works in 3 steps. Step 1, vessels entering the Persian Gulf must use the northern route, which gives Iran direct administrative oversight and inspection rights. Step 2, vessels exiting use the southern Omani route, but Oman only grants passage with Iran's approval. Step 3, a maritime service fee that gets split between Iran and Oman. This setup gives Tehran de facto control and revenue over 20% of global oil transit without ever needing a formal treaty with the U.S.
Section 3. The Pentagon strategy, the official response.
So how does Washington actually respond to all this? Well, the Pentagon's official stance, straight from their spokesman, is that the U.S. military has everything it needs to execute at the time and place of the president's choosing. To be fair, the strongest version of this argument is that the US doesn't strictly need precision missiles to strike. They still have aircraft carriers and manned aircraft like B-52s and F-35s that can drop conventional bombs the old-fashioned way. It's a completely serious argument, but let's test it against the facts on the ground.
When we actually deconstruct that argument, 4 realities pop up. First, planned strikes on Iranian infrastructure in early August were abruptly canceled for quote-unquote diplomatic considerations, which is a strange pivot if you truly have everything you need, right? Second, General Alexis Greenwich publicly warned the Pentagon of insufficient naval resources to manage simultaneous regional missions. Third, flying manned bombers into Iran requires suppressing their highly layered, advanced air defenses first, which requires the exact same precision missiles that we just saw are depleted. And finally, domestic politics. Senator Chuck Schumer recently shifted focus to blame political opponents for gas prices hitting $15.80 a gallon. When the political conversation shifts from grand military strategy to the pain at the local gas station, you know the underlying resources are stretched to their absolute limit.
Section 4. China's silent move. Strategic patience.
Now, this kind of localized overstretch doesn't happen in a vacuum. It creates massive geopolitical opportunities elsewhere. Just look at the simultaneous pressures happening across the globe right now. While the U.S. burns through interceptors in the Middle East, look over at East Asia. China's PLA conducted 3,700 incursions near Taiwan recently, and Chinese Coast Guard vessels have been repeatedly ramming Philippine ships. Down in Southeast Asia, China is now the top trade partner for 6 out of 11 ASEAN nations, happily signing infrastructure deals while the U.S. is distracted. Meanwhile, in Lebanon, stretched U.S. diplomats are frantically trying to manage the Israel-Hezbollah conflict. Look, managing one crisis is standard operating procedure. Managing 3 simultaneously with a depleted arsenal? That is a symptom of severe system strain.
Which brings us to a frankly glaring geopolitical anomaly. China imports 40% of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz. Yet Beijing has maintained absolute silence on this blockade for 5 months. Why? Because America's rapid depletion of military, financial, and political resources at an 80-to-1 cost ratio in the Middle East actually perfectly benefits Beijing's long-term strategy in the Indo-Pacific. Their silence isn't ignorance, it's simply patience.
Section 5. Imperial Overstretch. Historical Parallels.
We really need to connect these modern data points to Paul Kennedy's famous historical theory. He argued that great powers decline when their global military commitments grow faster than their economic base. Let's zoom out for a second and look at history. In the 3rd century, Rome's defense spending hit 80% of its budget, forcing them to completely debase their currency before their frontiers collapsed. Jump to the 16th century. Habsburg Spain controlled a massive global empire, right? But they declared bankruptcy 4 times because they literally couldn't afford to maintain it. In the 20th century, the British Empire faced a national debt of 250% of their GDP after World War II, which led to financial exhaustion and a quiet contraction of their global influence.
Now, take all of that and look at the stark mathematical reality of the United States as we head toward 2026. The national debt is projected to sit at 104% of GDP. For the first time in history, annual interest payments on that debt, we're talking over $1 trillion, actually exceed the entire $885 billion defense budget. This is happening simultaneously with the accelerating interceptor depletion we discussed, plus a massive $20 billion backlog in promised arms transfers to Taiwan.
So, if you take one crucial point away from this explainer, let it be this. Rome, Spain, and Britain all fully believe they were the exception to the rule. But exceptionalism does not exempt a nation from basic arithmetic. You simply cannot defy the math of 80-to-1 cost ratios indefinitely. To see how this analysis actually unfolds in real time, here are 3 specific things I want you to watch for in the coming days. Number 1, watch if Iran formally signs that technical framework with Oman, which would set their administrative trap in stone. Number 2, watch if Washington stays silent on Iran collecting that 20% maritime fee, because silence means they are recalculating whether they just have to accept it. And number 3, watch if China continues its strategic silence, proving they are perfectly happy watching the U.S. burn through its resources. I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on. When a nation no longer needs to negotiate with America to open a strait, and America no longer has the missiles to close it by force, who truly controls the oceans? Is it the country with the most aircraft carriers, or the country that controls the choke points those carriers have to pass through? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep your eyes on the numbers, and I'll see you next time.